بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. الحمد لله رب العالمين. My apologies, we were actually had a dinner with some people from the government, so we were in a sam'an wa ta'atan mode, so I apologize. Inshallah, we're gonna go through as much of the Kitab al-Ilm as possible in the short time that we have. But before we do that, I think many of you are probably very familiar with Imam al-Ghazali, but they say عند ذكر الصالحين تنزل الرحمات. When you make mention of righteous people, there's mercy descends. So it's good to go over some of the salient features of his life. One of the benefits of the Tabaqat literature, which is the biographical literature of the scholars, is that it instills in you, first of all, a desire to be like them, because we're an imitative species. We tend to aspire to virtue by our nature, because we have a nature that aspires to virtue. So when you read about virtuous people, and then when you see them, it's unfortunately these people are far less common, but there still are some people within our ummah, fortunately, that have the qualities of the people that we've read about in the past, so that we know that they're real. Because sometimes the hagiography, there's a tradition that sometimes seems exaggerated when you read about it. You read about virtuous people that would pray Fajr with the wudu of Isha, and you think, is that really true? Or people that read the Quran every 3 days. But having personally known people like that, I know that it's possible, because I've seen it with my own eyes. Also, the photographic memories that some of these scholars had, I've seen in some of the teachers that I've had memories that are just really astonishing. So, and then fortunately, unfortunately for us, he's not here this year, but in the past we've had Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, who in many ways is the Ghazali of his time, or the Shatibi of his time. He's certainly in his writings, and for some of you who might be fortunate enough to be able to read Arabic at that level, what's notable about his writing is, one, if you're accustomed to reading these scholars, he's writing in a very similar style and level of erudition, but he's also part of the conversation. And this is the conversation of the scholastic conversation that the ulama have over time. So ulama of the present, who are oceans of knowledge, have tended to read the best of what's gone in the past. So in any subject that they master, usul al-fiqh would be an example. Anybody who masters usul al-fiqh would have had to have read Imam al-Shafi'i's great work on usul al-fiqh, which begins the science of usul al-fiqh. And then they would have had to have read the great usuli scholars of Islam, most prominent amongst them, people like Abu Ma'ali al-Juwayni, Imam al-Ghazali himself, Imam al-Qarafi, Imam al-Shatibi, and then you have the derivative scholars of usul, who aren't really original, don't have original contributions, but either abridge or modify something that's been written from another madhab in their own madhab, like Ibn Qudama in the Hanbali madhab. So I want to talk a little bit about Imam al-Ghazali and why he's important. About his life, he was born in 450 in the Hijrah calendar. And his life, surprisingly, was not long by today's standards. I'm actually older than he was when he died. But he was born into a very poor family. Some say his name is actually Ghazali with a shadda from Ghazal, which is a carder of wool, which is what his father did. And others say it's from Ghazala, which was a small suburb of a village in the area of Tus, which is currently in northern Iran. He had a brother, Ahmad, who becomes a scholar and is more noted for his Sufism and his poetry than Imam al-Ghazali. But his father was a very simple man, but he loved the ulama. And he did not have the opportunity to study when he was young, but he really loved knowledge and he loved the ulama. And so he used to serve them. And because of that, some of the Qawm say that he was given these two great sons by Allah out of his love for the ulama, Allah, and his service towards them. He was given these sons, but he died when Imam al-Ghazali was probably about 5 or 6 years old, and he left in his will a small amount of money that he had, and entrusted a very pious man in the village to take care of him and his brother. But that money ran out pretty quickly, and so the man who was caretaking for the two of them actually put them in a madrasa, because in those days you could go to a madrasa and you get bread and water and maybe some soup and lodgings. And so Imam al-Ghazali was famous for saying, تعلمت العلم لغير الله فأبى أن يكون إلا لله. I learned knowledge for other than the sake of Allah, but knowledge refused to be other than for the sake of Allah. In other words, that he entered into the madrasa because he needed a place to live and eat as a young boy. But his knowledge ended up being for Allah, even if that wasn't the original intention. His first teacher, he had one, Ibn Sarraj and Ar-Razkari. These two were probably, he surpassed them pretty quickly. He then went, when he was still very young, he went to Nisapur, which was part of the Seljuk. And the Seljuks have different, like this was part of the Seljuk dynasty, but the Seljuks, there's the Seljuks of Central Asia, the Seljuks of Sham and Iraq, and then the Seljuks of Anatolia. So they're all from the same ethnic group, but they actually have different centers of their empire. And the Seljuks here were in power. They were a great dynasty, and they were great defenders of the Sunnah. And they were up against the occultic element of the Hermetic botany element that threatens orthodoxy. So they actually fought that element. And Imam al-Ghazali aligns with them. But he went and he studied, before he reached 20, he went and he studied in Nisapur. And he had some great teachers, but he surpassed them all. There's no teacher that he had that he would eventually surpass him, including Abu Ma'ali al-Juwayni. So when he was on his way back to Tus, he had spent I think 3 or 4 years studying, and he had what are called ta'liqats. These are like his notes, and he had them in a like a sack that he was carrying, and the caravan that he was in was seized by brigands, and he writes that one of the thieves took his mikhla, his bag, and he asked the head of the thieves if he would tell him to give him back his bag. And the man said, why should he do that? And he said, he asked him by Allah, he said, I just spent several years gathering all this knowledge, and if he takes it from me, it'll be a disaster for me. And the thief laughed at him, and he said, what kind of knowledge is that a thief like me could steal it from you? That's not real knowledge. If I could steal it, it's not knowledge. And Imam al-Ghazali said, هذا منطق أنطقه الله ليرشد به أمري. This is a logic that God inspired him to speak in order to guide me. And then he gave him back his ta'liqat, and he went and he spent 3 years memorizing everything he had learned. And he swore that he would never study anything except that he would put it to memory. And he had a phenomenal memory, but this is what he did. So after this, he begins to study with Abu Ma'ali al-Juwayni, Imam al-Haramain. And Imam al-Haramain is a very important figure in our tradition, because he takes usul al-fiqh. And what's important to note is Imam al-Ghazali is considered by many a Sufi. The reality of it is that he was probably one of the most, I think, really striking critics of Sufism. If you read in the Ihya, if you read At-Tabyin, you will see that he's actually, in fact, he ends his book At-Tabyin on a chapter on the Sufis, and he said that, of all these different groups he's been talking about, this is the most deluded group. Are the Sufis. And he talks about the delusion of the Sufis in their belief that they're the elect, the delusion of the Sufis in the way they dress. He talks about the fact that they used the religion for worldly gain, that they were often filled with pride in their hearts. So he's very critical of Sufism, but there's an important distinction, and I'll get back to the usul in a second. There's an important distinction. The first part of our ummah, there was a group called the Sufiya. The Sufiya of this first period are accepted largely by the entire scholastic community of Muslims. And to say they're not is just a lie. So people like Abu Yazid al-Bustami, Ma'ruf al-Karhi, Sari al-Saqati, Imam al-Junaid, Imam al-Qushayri, Abu Nu'aym, many of these early people, Abu Talib al-Makki, all of these men are considered imams and recognized. Also, Sidi Abdul Qadir Jilani, Ibn Taymiyyah says that his miracles are mutawatira. They're factual statements, historical statements that should be considered fact. So this idea that tasawwuf is a bid'ah or an innovation in the religion is very alien to the tradition. To say that is alien. But that does not mean that everyone who calls himself a Sufi is somehow acceptable. On the contrary, there is a lot of deviance in Tasawwuf and amongst the Sufis. And Imam al-Ghazali has been criticized in this late period by some for being a Sufi, as if that was some kind of a shameful thing. But that was not. And the laqab Sufi can be found amongst the muhaddithin. We have the Quran, the asanid of the Quran. You will find Sufis in the asanid of the Quran. You will find Sufis in the asanid of the hadith. So the religion has been transmitted by people that had that laqab and that were part of that tradition. And to deny that is really to deny something that is just undeniable. And Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah are used sometimes as to attack tasawwuf. But the reality of it is that the tasawwuf, even the name, is accepted by Ibn Taymiyyah, it's accepted by Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah did a commentary on Abdullah al-Ansari's famous work, a Hanbali, great Hanbali scholar and a Sufi, who wrote Manazil al-Sa'irin. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah did a commentary on that. He talks about fana and baqa, which are concepts that Imam Junaid articulated, but believed that they were Quranic concepts. So tasawwuf, like other sciences, emerged with technical terms. But Imam al-Ghazali is not primarily a Sufi, and this is important to remember. He is first and foremost, probably after Imam Shafi'i, the most important Usuli scholar in the history of Islam. And the Mustasfa, his Mankhul, when he wrote his Mankhul, because he wrote several books in Usul, when he wrote his Mankhul, his teacher Imam Abu Ma'ali al-Juwayni said, Dafani wa ana hayy. He buried me and I'm still alive. In other words, he surpassed me and my work. Imam al-Juwayni introduced the universals, the concept of that Islam came to preserve these 6 universals. There are 5 in his articulation. Some of the later scholars added a 6th, which is the ird. So حفظ دين ثم نفس مال نسب ومثله عقل وعرض قد وجب, like Imam al-Laqani says, that the حفظ دين, preservation of the religion, preservation of the self, of life, preservation of wealth, property, preservation of family, preservation of the intellect, and preservation of dignity, human dignity. These are the 6 universals that Islam came to preserve and protect. And everything in our usul can be reduced to the protection of one of these 6 universals. There's no commandment or prohibition in Islam that's not rational. None. All of them are rational. Some of them have what's called hukm ta'abbudi. In other words, the rational meaning is not understood by us. For instance, why we pray 3 rak'ats at Maghrib and 2 at Subh. We don't know. But we know why we pray rak'ats. That's rational. So the other one, we believe there's a hikmah in it, but it's been hidden from us. Some people have explored those things, but generally there's nothing in our tradition that would be definitive. So, but what Imam al-Ghazali does in usul, and I once asked Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayyah, who is, I think, and it's not my opinion, but the opinion of people far more worthy of me to assess this amongst usuli scholars, that he is the preeminent usuli scholar of our time. And his books are clear indications of that. Amari al-Dilalat, the Mashahid min al-Maqasid, his book on Fiqh al-Aqalliyat, Maqasid al-Sharia. He's written several books in usul that are not just repeating things that have been said many, many times before, but he's actually doing 2 things. He's taking from the tradition the best of what's gone in the past, but then he's also having his own tarjihats and his own original insights into things. So he's in that way, really a mujaddid of usul al-fiqh. But I asked him once that if he could only have one book of usul from all the books that have been written, which one would he take? And he said, Al-Mustasfa of Imam al-Ghazali. What's interesting, especially for some of the modern Hanbalis that attack Imam al-Ghazali, is that the most important Hanbali text that's studied by students of the Hanbali madhab is called Rawdat al-Nadhir, which is Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi's famous book. It's studied in Saudi Arabia now, in Medina, and that is basically an abridgment of the Mustasfa. So what makes Imam al-Ghazali unique? There's a few things that he does in Usul al-Fiqh. First of all, he is the first Usuli scholar to put logic as a propedeutic science, in other words, an introductory science to the study of Usul al-Fiqh. Some people find this odious and actually blame him for this. But one of the great scholars of this period who taught in Medina and wrote a book called Adwa al-Bayan, which is Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, Muhammad al-Amin al-Shinqiti, one of the great scholars that was produced by the land of Mauritania. He taught many, many years in Medina. And because some of the ulama, or most of the ulama there, actually prohibited or considered logic prohibited, because he felt it was so important as a subject, and because they wouldn't permit him to teach it, he wrote a book on logic and just changed all the names. And they used that book at the university in Medina. It was basically just a book on logic, but he just changed all the names and called it Adab al-Bahth wal Munadhara. He didn't call it Mantiq, but it's basically logic. So Imam al-Ghazali introduced logic. Now, Ibn Taymiyyah wrote a book, Radd al al-Mantiqiyin, which is called Refutation of the Logicians. And Ibn Taymiyyah had a problem with logic, but he did not have a problem. What he had a problem with was the metaphysics of logic. Although he criticizes other aspects of logic, and it's a 2-volume book. It's been translated into English by Wa'il al-Hallaq, at least the abridgment that Imam Suyuti did. Imam Suyuti was also somebody who attacked the science of logic. I have a suspicion his logic teacher stole a book from him and attributed it to himself. When he was 17 years old, he was very upset about it. It was a book he wrote in Usul, and I have a little bit of a suspicion that might have left a bitter taste in him about logic. But the idea that logic is a bid'ah is really absurd, because logic, we all use logic, either poorly or well. But we're logicians. Every human being is a logician, because we're all reasoning. There's reasons why we do things. In the same way, we're all grammarians. We're either poor grammarians or we're using grammar well. But everybody is using grammar, like the man in The Bourgeois Gentleman, I think, who's amazed that he's been speaking prose all his life, right? When the man explains to him the difference between prose and poetry, that people don't know what they're doing because they don't have names for it. But we're all using predicates and adverbs and adjectives. We all have syntax. We use it well or we use it poorly. If we've studied grammar, or if we're in a country where standard language is usually grammatically correct. The United States, generally, the standard language is reasonably good. In classes in England, it's better. But Americans use poor grammar all the time. There's an argument amongst linguists that there's no such thing as poor grammar, it's just what people speak. But those are people that say that are relativists, and really, in the end, they're nihilists, because rules are important, and we can't speak table, walk, night, late, come, why not? If I start talking like that, you're not going to understand anything I say. So there's a reason why we speak logically, grammatically, and those of us who speak rhetorically effectively, we speak persuasively. So these are all important sciences that were studied. And so what Imam al-Ghazali understood. Ibn Taymiyyah in his Radd al Mantiqiyin says that المنطق لا يفيد يستغني عنه الذكي ولا يفيد الغبي. That a really intelligent person doesn't need it, and it won't benefit a stupid person because it's too difficult. Well, that's nice for, the bell curve, all those people that are over in the standard deviation over here and then those over here, but all the people in the middle that it's beneficial for, he's forgetting all those people. So it's true, Sahaba did not know tasawwurat and tasdiqat and qiyas. They didn't know syllogisms, but they used them, and the Prophet used them. And Imam al-Ghazali wrote a book called Qistas al-Mustaqim, proving Ibn Taymiyyah says that أبو حامد يدعي أنه تعلم المنطق من القرآن والحقيقة أنه تعلمه من ابن سينا. He claims that he learned logic from the Quran, but the truth is he learned it from Ibn Sina. But if you read his book Qistas al-Mustaqim, he shows you that the Quran is using syllogisms. And there have been over 30 syllogisms identified in the Quran, usually enthymemes. And one of the things he shows is that they're the 5 most important, the golden syllogisms are used in the Quran. And so the prophets used logic. And when they reasoned, they're reasoning with logic. And the Quran is speaking to us rationally. The Quran is telling us to look, to reflect, to think, to use our aql. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ الَّذِينَ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Those who reflect, those who think. So he felt logic was very important. And he said that the early people didn't need it in the same way they didn't need grammar. Because Umar radiallahu anhu did not need to know the 22 mansubats because he didn't make mistakes in his grammar. He didn't need to know the 11 marfu'at. He didn't need to know the 3 majrurat. He knew those. He knew them sariqatan, like the Arabs said, لَسْتُ بِنَحْوِيًّا يُلُوكُ لِسَانُهُ وَلَكِنْ سَلَقِيٌّ أَقُولُ فَأُعْرِبُ. I'm not a grammarian who stammers as he speaks, trying not to make mistakes. He said, I'm saliqi, I'm a pure Arab that speaks and it's correct. And this is the way the early people were. So they didn't need grammar, they didn't need logic, because they had it by fitrah. And the Prophet uses qiyas many times. In the hadith, he uses analogical reasoning, which Ibn Taymiyyah did accept as the reasoning of the fuqaha. He accepted analogical reasoning. He had a problem with deductive reasoning because he didn't believe in universals, and he was really the first nominalist, as far as I can tell, in history. There's a debate about Boethius and Porphyry because they only indicate that there's a problem with universals. But Ibn Taymiyyah was clearly had a problem with the concept of universals. And there's reasons for that also. And to be fair to him, in many ways, he was attempting to defend the tradition from the onslaught of very dangerous Greek ideas and dangerous occultic ideas. So Imam al-Ghazali, it's important to remember that he introduces logic as being central to our tradition. And after Ghazali, logic becomes one of the primary studies in the madrasa tradition. This is something that some of the modern, whatever you want to call them, ideologues or critics of al-Ghazali really have a problem with. And there's people that like to purify Islam, do some type of ethnic cleansing of Hellenistic thought from the Islamic tradition. But the truth is, the Prophet said, al-hikmatu dallatul mu'min. Wisdom is the lost property of the believer. And he said, and it's attributed to him, and Ibn Abd al-Barr, who was called Hafidh al-Maghrib, one of the greatest muhaddithin in the history of Islam, he quotes this hadith, and the meaning is true, but Al-Hafidh Ibn Abd al-Barr doesn't suggest that it's not from the Prophet ﷺ, but he said, "Utlub al-ilm walaw fi as-Sin," seek knowledge even unto China. So wherever knowledge is, we benefit from it. And the Muslims benefited greatly from Aristotle. Ibn Sina, Imam al-Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah said, Abu Hamid shariba shifa famarida. He drank the shifa. That was the book of Ibn Sina. He said he drank the shifa and he got sick from it. Shifa means a healing. But my response to that is shariba shifa. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala razaqahu ladhatuhu wa abqa fihi quwwatuhu wa adhaba anhu adahu. That Allah let him taste the delight of it, preserved in him what was strength from it, and let him reject what was harmful from it. And he was capable of doing that. The Shifa is an amazing work. And Ibn Sina is a mafkhara of the ummah. That our ummah could produce an intellect like that is a proof of Islam. It's the thamra of this religion that it produced intellects like that. It doesn't mean he didn't have mistakes. He had mistakes. He had some very serious mistakes, but he was one of the most phenomenal intellects in human history, recognized by Europeans. Ibn Sina is part of the European tradition. He has a massive influence on St. Thomas Aquinas. He introduced the concept, the Kalam cosmological argument is basically from Ibn Sina, and that is the last argument standing for the proof of the existence of God, a rational proof. I mean, that's his proof. So he was a brilliant man. It doesn't mean he didn't have mistakes, but Imam al-Ghazali benefited from him, but he also refuted him. And he wrote a book called Maqasid al-Falasifa, which was to clarify what philosophers meant. But then he followed that up with a second book, Tahafut al-Falasifa, which is the incoherence of the philosophers, and showed the problems. One of the things that philosophers believed, they had three main problems which he considered kufr. And then they had 17 other problems that he considered bid'ah, muharrama, like. But the kufr involved that God was coexistent with the cosmos. And this is a Greek belief, that the cosmos always existed and God orders it. And then also that God didn't know universals, which is a very, very sophisticated problem that is superficially understood by a lot of people, that when they hear that, they don't understand what they were actually trying to do with that. But the refutation of that he knows the juz'iyat, is the belief of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And then finally, that they did not believe in the resurrection of the body, the Ba'ath al-Ajsad. So these were the three things he considered kufr that were in their tradition. But as far as we know, Ibn Sina was a Hanafi, and those are the indications that he died as a Muslim. But what's in his book is he took Greek thought and attempted to Islamicize it, and was not successful in certain aspects, and in other aspects he was, especially in the logic. And he had his own original contributions to logic. But Imam al-Ghazali, that really is the area that, and then in furu', he was a master of the Shafi'i madhab. He was an absolute genius in fiqh. He was a master of the aqidah, and some of his points in aqidah are original, and his contributions are original. Where he was admittedly weak, and he says this, is that he was not a muhaddith. Towards the end of his life, all he was reading was hadith. He was studying al-Bukhari and Muslim in particular, and Ibn Taymiyyah said that that's how he died, with the book and the sunnah. But that's also how he lived. He was also a master of ethics. His book Mizan al-Amal is a very important book. It's the aslama of the akhlaq of Ibn Miskawayh. Raghib Isfahani is a marhala. He's like a barzakh between the Hellenistic thought of Ibn Miskawayh and his akhlaq, and he wrote Tahdhib al-Akhlaq, which is basically Nicomachean ethics of Aristotle. And then Raghib al-Isfahani writes Adh-Dhari'a ila Makarim al-Shari'a, and introduces really a Quranic foundation for ethics. But Imam al-Ghazali then does Mizan al-Amal, which is very important work. And then finally, what he did is he understood something about the religion that probably wasn't seen in the way that he saw it. Tasawwuf before Imam al-Ghazali was defended by people like Abu Talib al-Makki, al-Kalabadi, Ta'arruf ila Madhhab al-Tasawwuf is a very famous early work. Ibn Sarraj was a very important scholar of Tasawwuf. Al-Muhasibi, very important. But what all of the previous people before Ghazali, Imam al-Qushayri, preeminent amongst them, the Risala al-Qushayriya is a very important work. What they tried to show that Tasawwuf was 1/3 of Islam, that it was ihsan, maqam al-ihsan, and that you had Islam, Iman, Ihsan. And they wanted to show that this is what Islam is. Ihsan is the third dimension, and it's what became known as Tasawwuf. What Imam al-Ghazali did was he really showed that it was deeper than that. That Iman, Islam, and Ihsan, all of them, in other words, really the entire religion in essence is a spiritual truth. That everything we do has spiritual meaning. Zakat is a spiritual practice. Hajj is a spiritual practice. Your belief is much deeper than simply rote memorization of 20 attributes. That there is a spiritual dimension to Iman that is much deeper. And this is what he did in his Ihya. What he did was he showed that the entire religion is infused with meaning. And that if you divorce it from this, you take the ruh out of the body. You take the spirit out of the body, and what you have is something dead. And so this is really at the root of his message, that if we lose sight of this, that everything that you are doing is in preparation for this immense meeting. And this meeting is the single most important event in your entire purpose and existence. The reason you have been created is this meeting with your Lord. And it's going to happen. And just as Moses was promised 40 nights, he was given 40 days to prepare for this meeting, Imam al-Ghazali wrote 40 books. And the first book is the book of knowledge, because that is your provision on the journey. If you don't have that, you can't make the journey. You will die before you get to your destination. And the last book is the book of death, because that's the destination. The 20th book, which is the heart of the Ihya, is the akhlaq of the Prophet ﷺ, because that is the heart of the affair, is to be on the heart of the Prophet ﷺ, in his akhlaq, in his behavior. So this is really at the root of Imam al-Ghazali's message, is to give ihya to these ulum, to revive them by putting the ruh back into them. He felt that the scholars had desiccated these traditions, that they had deracinated them of their essence, which was the spiritual truths behind all of these sciences. That in the end, they're all vehicles to know your Lord. And that's why it's such an important work. Does he have mistakes? He's human. But his mistakes are other people's virtues. So those people that attack Imam al-Ghazali are really fools. Al-Qafilatu tasri wal-kirabu ta'wi. He's one of the greatest fruits of this tradition. He's recognized even outside of the faith. people recognize him. St. Thomas Aquinas quotes him as one of his sources. You can see direct lifting in the Summa Theologica of some of Imam al-Ghazali's writings. Alhamdulillah. Anyway. Mm-hmm. Any questions? How did individuals of earlier times manage to master so many sciences and disciplines? It's a very good question that I've pondered a lot. Fakhruddin al-Razi says in the introduction to his tafsir, he says that I know that what I know could not be learned in one lifetime. So, these people were given gifts from God. This divine infusion. The Prophet, when Hassan ibn Thabit used to do the hijah of the mushrikeen, he said, "Ahju wa ayyadak Allah bi ruh al-Qudus." Speak your poetry against them, and may God strengthen you with the Holy Spirit. So the Ruh al-Qudus is real. The angels are real. These people have Malakani inspiration. They have ilham. Ahmed bin Idris, one of the great scholars of the 19th century, if he wanted an ayah of Quran, he looked in his right palm. If he wanted a hadith, he used to look in his left palm. We have Palm Pilot now, so that's a different type of Palm Pilot. Imam Shafi, when he studied with Imam Malik, he used to do this. He was only 15, and Imam Malik, it was bothering him. He said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm too poor to afford ink and paper, so this is the way I memorize." He said, how do you do that? He said, "Well, I write it in my palm and then I remember it." He said, "Let me hear what I just recited to you." And he recited it back verbatim. And Imam Malik was very impressed with him. And he told him to have taqwa. And he said, you're going to have an affair. Inna laka sha'na. You're going to be somebody. So have taqwa. But that was Imam Shafi'i. He said that once he saw the wind lifted the dress of a woman, and his eye lingered longer than it should have. And when he got back, he used to memorize the lawh with one reading, and it was taking him more than one reading. So he went and he said, "Shakawtu ila waki'i su'a hifdhi, farshadani bitark al-ma'asi, wa qala inna al-ilma nurun, wa nur Allah la yuhda li'asi." He said, "I complained to Waki' about my bad memory. And so he told me, don't disobey your Lord, because knowledge is a light, and the light is not guided to disobedient ones." So, but I know my own teachers mastered many, many sciences. So I know part of it is really hard work and himma, but another aspect is tawfiq from Allah, retentive memory, insights. Those are all gifts. But I mean, Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, his Muhammad Saddam Wud Shain was his teacher in Arabic. And he said he doesn't think that Sibawi was more knowledgeable in Arabic than Muhammad Saddam Wud Shain. Muhammad Saddam Wud Shain, Sheikh Abdullah studied with him. He wrote 1,000 lines on the muthallathat, which are the words in Arabic that can have three different ways of three different diacritical marks on them. Like jaddu, jiddu, and juddu. So there's a muthallath, because each one means something different. So he wrote 1,000-line poetry on all the words that have that, which Sheikh Abdullah studied with him. In Arabic, he learned the Alfiya, which is 1,000 lines, with the shawahid that goes with that. And then he learned 3,000 lines of the ihmirar on top of that, which are all the additions. And even his own teacher, Muhammad Saddam Wud Shain, corrected Ibn Malik in different places in the Alfiya, showing that his opinion was a weaker opinion. And that's just in the Arabic language. One of the scholars that I met knew the Qamus of Al-Fayruzabadi, several thousand page book by heart, could quote any page. So Sheikh Abdullah learned the 10 qira'ats. He memorized the Shatibiya. He knows the 10 qira'ats. He's taught tafsir for many years. There's no word in the Quran that he doesn't know the meaning of. The tafsir of Asbab al-Nuzul. In Usul, he mastered the works of Imam Shatibi, of Imam al-Qarafi, and of Imam al-Ghazali. And then in Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. In Furu', which are the branches, because Usul are the Dalail al-Ijmaliyah, and then the Furu' are the Dalail al-Tafsiliyah. In the Furu', he versified the book of Ibn Rushd, which is Bidayat al-Mujtahid. So he versified several thousand lines of poetry so that he would memorize the dalils from the other madhabs. So that's somebody that I studied with and know personally. So unfortunately, we're losing, these people are dying off, and may Allah preserve him, give him a long life. But we had great scholars in our ummah for centuries. And this is one of the dangers. That's why some of the young people need to turn off the Facebooks and turn off all this stuff and really try to learn this knowledge and take it seriously, because يحمل هذا العلم من كل قرن عدوله. You know, that this knowledge is carried in each generation by upright people. You know, the adl is, they have to be upright. So وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ. Have taqwa. Allah teaches, even though that's not a jumla shartiyya. The meaning is, you know, man amila bima alima awrathu Allahu ilma ma lam ya'lam. Whoever acts according to his knowledge, God will give him knowledge that he didn't know. And there's ilm ladunni, there's kasbi and wahbi. So there's kasbi knowledge, and then there's wahbi knowledge. Kasbi knowledge is earned and acquired, but wahbi knowledge is given, and it's given because of the kasb, because of the ikhlas, these things. It was mentioned yesterday that the sunnah of helplessness is to accept your situation. What does this mean in terms of both one's physical and spiritual states and actions? How far do we keep sinning to change our, striving to change our situation if it appears that that is what Allah has decreed? You know, this is probably better dealt with in your Aqidah class with Ustad Omar, because this is about qadar and ikhtiyar, about choice, and certain things are by aqdar, and then certain things are by ikhtiyar, and hikmah is knowing which is which. You know, the famous prayer that, you know, God, give me the ability to accept the things I can't change, to change the things that I can, and to give me the wisdom to see the difference. It's a nice prayer, but that's pretty much it. It's hikmah. It's knowing that takes hikmah to know that difference. And I'm going to get into that when we talk about in the Kitab al-Ilm about what hikmah is, because that's one of the things that's lacking. Imam al-Ghazali has the 3 souls, and inshallah we'll talk about this more. But he's got the pig soul, the dog soul, and the sage soul. And right now in our ummah, too many of us have the quwwa al-shahwaniyya and the quwwa al-ghadabiyya are the hakima. The rulers in our souls are the pig and the dog. And the ruler is supposed to be the sage, the aql. It's the hakim. And hakim and hikmah are related. So when you have control of yourself, that's when hikmah will kick in. But as long as you don't have control of yourself, you won't act accordingly. And the Prophet said, هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ تَزْكِيَةً وَيُعَلِّمُهُمْ الْعِلْمَ الْكِتَابَةَ, the Quran, وَالْحِكْمَةِ, and how to apply the Quran, because the Sunnah is the practical application of the Quran. The Prophet was كَانَ خُلُقُ الْقُرْآنِ, so he was implementing the Quran. There are times when he got angry. There are times when he showed immense forbearance, because hikmah is knowing when to get angry and when not to get angry. If you don't have hikmah, you're just angry all the time. We've got Muslims walking around, they're just angry. They're just angry people. And sometimes they're not, they use the conditions of the world as an excuse to manifest their own personal pathology. They're just angry. And so, oh, well, Palestine's an opportunity for me to just express my already existing rage. If it wasn't Palestine, I'd find some other excuse for it. They're just not well. And there's a lot of people like that. So, like Aristotle said, that getting angry is easy, but wisdom is getting angry for the right reason, directed at the right source, with the right amount, at the right time, to the right degree. I mean, that's hikmah. So anger is not, Allah made us creatures that get angry for a hikmah. But He also said, la taghdab, which means don't let your anger overcome your aql. Because himaya, which is protection, is related to hamas, which yatahammas is to get angry, to get enthusiastic about something, but usually it's related to anger. Hamasa is a quality of the Jahili Arabs. But hamaqa is what follows when you don't have the hikmah. They run amok, ahmaq. That's a Malay term that got into English, to run amok, because the Malays don't pronounce the H. One of the Turkish men told us tonight, because said they call that in Syria, wara inab, they don't pronounce the qaf. So he said a man went to the qadi. These two guys got caught and they were brought before the judge. He said, what's your name? He said, Asim. He said, astaghfirullah, Qasim, qul Qasim. And so he said, Qasim. He said, what's your name? He said, Ahmed. He said, what do you mean? He said, I saw how angry you got with him. I was afraid you get mad at me. Yesterday, you mentioned feeling helplessness amongst the Muslims due to current oppression in the Muslim lands. You said that we should seek answers in our repentance and supplication to Allah rather than rebel. That's actually a bad joke. Don't repeat that, because it's bad adab. They should use another name. You said that we should seek answers in our repentance and supplication to Allah rather than rebel. Astaghfirullah. In this country, they used to say Mehmet. They didn't say Muhammad, because they never wanted the Prophet's name to be used poorly. So astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayk. Bad adab. So how do you explain the hadith, whoever among you sees an evil, remove with your hand, tongue, and heart? Well, that's the point. That hadith is the very point, is that it doesn't say, it says, if you're able. فَإِنْ اسْتَطَعَ أَنْ يُغَيِّرُهُ بِيَدِهِ. Right? If he's able to change it with his hand, let him change it with his hand. If he's able to change it, and if he can't do that, then change it with his tongue. If he can't do that, change it with his heart. وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. That's the weakest of iman, but it's still good, because الْمُؤْمِنُ الْقَوِيُّ خَيْرٌ وَأَحَبُّ إِلَى اللَّهِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِ الضَّعِيفِ وَفِي كُلٍّ خَيْرٌ. In both are good. The weak believer and the helpless believer and the strong believer, the strong one is more beloved, because he's more beneficial. Right? أَحَبُّكُمْ إِلَى اللَّهِ أَنْفَعُكُمْ لِعِيَالِي. The most beloved to you with God are the most beneficial. So a mu'min al-qawi is more beneficial than a mu'min al-da'if. وَفِي كُلٍّ خَيْرٌ. So that's the point. If you're able to change it with your hand, by all means, change it with your hand. If you're able to change it with your tongue. The hand, they say, our ulama say, the hand is for the sulta. The tongue is for the alim. And the heart is for the ammi, for somebody who's not learned, but he knows it's wrong. So the Prophet is giving... there's a maqam for each one. So if you don't have authority, you can't go and just, get rid of alcohol If a Muslim country permits alcohol, and alcohol has been around for centuries, don't think it's something of late. I mean, the Abbasid period, they had Hawanit in Baghdad, and this is not new, these aren't new things. So don't, this kind of Puritanism that has infected our community it's a bad sign. I mean, even if you look at the Prophet ﷺ, there was alcohol in Medina. There were people drinking at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. We know that for a fact. They got drunk. And there's hadith in al-Bukhari. So, and the Prophet was very gentle with them, because those type of sins are far less. I mean, that's a kabira, and I'm not belittling it in any way. But if you want the big sins, the economic sins those are the really big ones. Riba, I mean, and Muslims now, would never touch alcohol, but riba, it's not a big deal. So, we have to do what we're able to do, but we need to strengthen ourselves, and that begins with knowledge. There's a bab in al-Bukhari, which is bab al-ilmu qabla al-qawli wal-amal. Knowledge before speaking and acting. You have to learn before you can speak and act. And this is where we have too many activists that haven't studied, and we have students also that aren't active. That's true. But I'll tell you something about our religion, and it's very important to keep this in note. Uzla is permitted in our religion. It is absolutely permitted to disengage from the world. It's better not to, because mu'min al-qawi is better than the mu'min al-da'if, but it is permitted. And women they have no taklifa in activism, none. If they want to be active, that's fine, but they don't have any taklifa. Their taklifa is in their home, with their families, with their children. That doesn't mean there weren't sahabiyat that were very active. They were, and there are active women. But women shouldn't have to feel, a lot of women, it's not their nature. They shouldn't have to feel like, oh, I'm not doing anything. If you're raising your children well, with prophetic values, if you're cooking food with niyyah and with dhikr and nourishing your family, those are very important things to be doing. Those women that want to do other things, then, if they have the circumstances and the wherewithal to do that, then that's fine. But it is permitted for people to disengage. And there are many books on this. There are many hadiths that indicate. The Prophet said the best wealth of a person towards the end of time is just to go out up into the mountains with some goats. So nobody can say that they can't do that. And so this whole idea that everybody has to be out there doing something, and why aren't you doing something? Okay, tell me what to do. What do you want me to do? You want me to go blow up myself? Is this some kind of enlightened way to deal with our circumstances? Is this really going to benefit us? Is this going to further the cause of the ummah? What do you want us to do? Seriously, tell me. What do you want? Do we go to Syria and fight? For what? What's going to happen when this is over? I don't know. Look at Afghanistan. Look at all those people that fought 40 years ago against the Russians. Now look, what were they fighting for? God knows what. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ told Hudayfa, اعتزل الفرق كلها. He said, if you don't see an imam and a jama'ah, he said, avoid all the sects. He just said, avoid. It's in Sahih Bukhari. He said, اعتزل. That's an amr from the Prophet ﷺ. Go into uzla. Just avoid all the sectarianism. I mean, there's so much confusion now in the Muslim world. Show me the Rayatul Islam. What, these people these people in Iraq, we go take bay'ah with somebody who's cutting off the heads of people because they're Shia. When in the history of Islam have our imams cut off people's heads because they were Shia? You show me. When? Show me where in our books it says to kill Shia. They're Muslims. They say, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. I was trained in Sunni tradition, and that's what I believe. But they're Muslims. I don't believe they're not Muslim. They're Muslims. Lakum madhabukum wali madhabi. They have their way. They were born into it. They were indoctrinated into something. They have an alternate version of events. And in their world, it all makes sense. And if you study that early period, it's very confusing. I mean, Bani Umayyah did horrible things to Ahl al-Bayt. You study that, people get confused studying that early period. But what is that? To cut people's heads off because they're Shia? A'udhu billah. There's many devout, pious people in Iran. Seriously, they weep tears. They're human beings. And to demonize people is just evil. Even Jews. The whole demonization of Jews is wrong. It's not our tradition. It's not our tradition. There's people in Israel that are totally opposed to this. There's Hasidim that don't even believe in the Zionist state. They're against it. There were Jews living there before the partition. 5%, 6% of Palestine was owned by Jews before the Palestine. They owned 6% of the land. Muslims never forbade Jews from making migration to the Muslim world. And there's periods where they were treated reasonably well, and then there were other periods where they weren't. I mean, in one of the North African states, the kids used to say to Jews, "Huz arba." If they saw a Jew, they would say, "Huz arba," shake four, and the Jew would have to do this little dance for them. It's humiliation. It's not funny. It's humiliation. It's not our religion. Prophet didn't treat people like that. So Muslims need to think deeply about these things, about our state. We have so much. I mean, we call the Jews racist, and there's racists amongst them. I mean, there's some rabid racists in those settlers, but there's some rabid racists amongst our community as well. You watch some of those khutbahs. If I was a Jew watching a khutbah from some of these guys that they show on memory, we're going to nadbahuhum dhabhan, narbihim fil bahar, naqturuhum qatra, we're going to kill every last one of you. And some Jew, these guys are, their ancestors were in the Holocaust, their grandfather, grandmother. So that's a real thing to them, right? So we're against the Israeli aggression. I'm against it. We're all against it. But there's a lot of Jews that are against it as well. So don't make these blanket statements. All Jews are evil. Quran doesn't do that. Minhum al-mu'minun. Amongst them are believers. وَأَكْثَرُهُمْ الْفَاسِقُونَ. That's basically true about us as well. Let's be honest with ourselves. So this is why, we need a complete transformation in our understanding, in our community. We have to. Any other? Is that it? Time to go. Last one. That one. When we study the seerah of our Prophet ﷺ and the advent of Islam among Sahaba, it seems as if Islam at that time was more simple in terms of studying and applying it. The preceding scholars, rahmatullah alayhim, provide us with such vast resources to studying the deen. Why does it seem that the practice of Islam of our Prophet's time was so much simpler than the exponentially deep resources we must use today and study Islamic practice? It's a really good question. For common people, you're students of knowledge. For common people, Islam should be very simple. For aqeedah, if you really understand ikhlas, that should be enough. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ Allahu samad, lam yalid walam yulad, walam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. That, our mutakallimun say that negates the 8 types of kufr. There's 8 types of kufr. The Qul huwa Allahu ahad, it negates ta'addudiyya and inqisam, that God is more than one or that he's composite, that he has parts. And then Allahu samad, that negates naqs and aib. It negates deficiency and defect. Lam yalid wa lam yulad, that negates illa and ma'luliyah. It negates cause and effect. God is not the cause of anything in a causative sense. He creates things, but there's not a cause and effect relationship. Because with cause and effect, they have to be related. Right? In other words, when you cause something to happen, there's a relationship between the thing affected and the cause. With Allah, there's no causal relationship. He's transcendent in that way. Like if I make that sound, I have to have, there's a causal relationship that connects me with the creation. Allah has no causal connection in that way. But He brought everything into existence. خَالِقُ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. خَالِقُ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. So that negates illah and ma'luliyah. And then وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, it negates shabih وَالنَّظِيرُ. It negates any likeness or opposite. And so those are the 8 points. If you understand those really well, that will suffice to get to Jannah. And obviously you have to know the prophets are all true, and so I'm simplifying things, but that is enough. The Prophet said, "Man qala la ilaha illallah dakhala al-jannah." If you say that, you'll get into paradise, believing there's nothing worthy of worship except the one true. La ma'budu bi haqqin siwa Allah. There's nothing worshipped in truth, because many things are worshipped other than Allah. But in truth, nothing is worshipped other than except Allah. In truth, bi haqqin. La ma'budu bi haqqin illallah. And then the akhlaq of the Prophet is not difficult. Be good to people, speak truthfully, don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat. 10 commandments. تعالوا أتلوا ما حرم ربكم عليكم. Right? قل تعالوا أتلوا ما حرم ربكم عليكم. Come and let me tell you what your Prophet your Lord prohibited from you to do. ألا تشركوا به شيئا. Right? وبالوالدين إحسانا ولا تقتلوا أولادكم من إملاق نحن نرزقكم وإياهم ولا تقربوا الزنا ولا تقربوا الفواحش ما ظهر منها وما بطن. ولا تقتلوا النفس التي حرم الله إلا بالحق. Right? ذلك وصاكم به لعلكم تعقلون. That's the basic akhlaq of the Quran is the 10 commandments. Right? That's not difficult. That's easy. So that aspect. But if you want to know why it's complicated, because language is complicated. Because language bears a lot of meanings. Because when you get into religion, religion is dangerous. And if you leave people just to read these things and think they can understand them without having the depth of knowledge to really understand it, then you have what's going on in the Muslim world right now, where every Tom, Dick, and Abdullah is running around chopping somebody's head off because they disagree with them. So this is a problem. One example, any hadith that is related, the Prophet speaks with different voices. Sometimes he speaks as a qadi. Sometimes he speaks as a mufti. Sometimes he speaks as a hakim. Sometimes he speaks as a nasih, giving advice. The mufti, the mujtahid has to differentiate. One example of that, the Prophet ﷺ, when Hind said, Abu Sufyan rajulun shahihun, right? He's withholding. He doesn't give me what I need. The Prophet said, "Khudi min malihi bil ma'ruf." Take from his wealth bil ma'ruf. Take from his wealth what's a custom of your socioeconomic status amongst the Quraysh. I mean, these are all implied. That's what he meant. Bil ma'ruf means a woman of your stature in Mecca, take what you need according to what women like you in this society, the urf. Abu Hanifa said that that's mutlaq, so a woman can take the wealth of her husband if he's not giving it to her, and she doesn't have to tell him. Imam Malik said no, he's acting as a qadi there. So Abu Hanifa was saying he's acting as a mufti. Imam Malik said no, he's acting as a qadi. So the woman has to go to the qadi to get that permission. Which one is right? Allahu a'lam. I'm Maliki, you're Hanafi, my wife can't take my money, your wife can. So, you know. I just hand her the money, she does it all. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. So that is why Islam is not an easy religion. Like all religions, the Quran has many, many meanings. Arabic is a very vast language. The Prophet spoke in Arabic. His words bear a lot of different meanings. And that's why you have to study, you have to master. If you're going to be a mujtahid, if you're just going to be a abid and practice Islam, it's very simple. And you can learn it very quickly. I guarantee you could learn your religion well as an adult in 3 or 4 months if you were serious. All you need to practice your religion, you could learn it in a couple of months. Really. Maybe even less if you really worked and learned quickly. So it is simple at that level. But if you want to give fatwa, if you want to have ijtihad, if you want, no. Even amongst the Sahaba, only a handful of them gave fatwa. They were brilliant men living with the Prophet. The fatwas were, Abu Huraira, with all his knowledge, rarely gave fatwa. And Aisha faulted him in some of his opinions. She said he's wrong about that. The Prophet didn't mean that. Aisha is one of the most important sources because she was a genius. I mean, she was mulhama. Allah gave her gifts and she was the Prophet's wife and she's our mother, but she was brilliant. So, but you can see they differed. Sahaba differed. And to learn hadith is very difficult. To learn the maratib al-hadith, to learn the sahih, the hasan, and then the usul. Imam Malik has istihsan, he has musalih al-mursala, he has sadd al-dharaya. Imam Shafi'i doesn't have those. Abu Hanifa has istislah, but not to the level of Imam Malik. So they differ in their usul. The usul are different, and Islam bears all those meanings. And that's why you have to have a lot of knowledge. Arabic is hard. Most people don't know Arabic anymore. Arabs don't know Arabic anymore. I mean, they know Darija or Amiya, but to study Arabic is very difficult. You know, I mean, if you ask Arab like La yanalu ahdi al-zalimin, you know, what does that mean? Why is it that way? What's zalimin? Because one would think it would say La yanalu ahdi al-zalimun, right? But that's not what it means. Zalimin there is maf'ulun bihi. The ahad is that's the fa'al. You know, the ahad is what naluhu. So, you know, and there are many, many examples like that in the Quran. So Arabic is, and then rhetoric. Majaz, look at the different majazat. There's people that make takfir of people because they don't understand rhetoric. You know, if you say the doctor healed me, that's not shirk. That's a type of majaz. It's called majaz mursal. It's permitted itlaq as-sabab ala al-musabbib. You can call the means the maker of the means. The Prophet is the shari' majazan. He's not shari' haqiqatan. He's not the lawgiver in reality, but we can call him the shari' because he's speaking on behalf of the lawgiver. The minister speaks on behalf of the king. You can say the minister ordered us to do this, but it's really the king that's ordering you because he represents the king. This is majazat. You know, kinaya is important. The Prophet ﷺ used kinaya in his language. He used words that meant different things. And sometimes they debate about those words, like whether it was kinaya or whether he meant something else. So our religion's vast. Qira'at are vast. Just learning tajweed, the qira'at of the 7 qira'at, that's like a lifetime. If you want to master tajweed, really master. I'm not talking about, I mean, alhamdulillah, our ulama said lahn khafi is ma'dhur, most of them, not all of them. But, you know, so if you're not getting your idgham, if you're not, but as long as you're not making grammatical mistakes and you're pronouncing with the huruf properly, but you don't know the mustahaq, because every letter has a haq and a mustahaq. You know, to master that, there's people that spend several years until they really get it down to perfection. And amongst the Sahaba, there were those that were better than others. So just learning qira'at is not easy to master that. Allah yubarak fikum. It's late. Assalamu alaikum.